It was the second set, and Monica Seles sat down for a break between games. She didn't see the man climbing down from the stands behind her. The tennis broadcast cut away to the scoreboard as an ear-piercing scream rang out through the stadium. When the cameras came back to Monica, she was clutching at her back and wincing in pain. She stumbled away from the stands and her water hit the ground as she collapsed. A hero in the crowd tackled the man seconds later, trying desperately to take the knife from his hands. Monica Seles had been stabbed. Security dragged the attacker out of the stands as Monica was put on a stretcher and rushed off to hospital. But when the police later questioned the man about why he did it, his answer only created more questions. The man admitted he had done it for Monica's biggest rival, Steffi Graf. Monica Seles had spent her childhood watching Steffi on TV. She was the blonde German champion with the unstoppable golden forehand, the world #1 who seemed untouchable. She used to be a hero to Monica, but now Steffi Graf had seemingly become the reason that Monica Seles was bleeding in the back of an ambulance. Before the attack that changed everything, Monica Seles had already defied the odds. Just getting to the top of the sport was a miracle in itself. She was born in December 1973 in Novi Sad, Yugoslavia, a city where tennis barely existed. There were only 4 public clay courts in the entire area, and getting time on any of them was pretty much impossible. So, the Seles family would improvise. They strung a net between 2 parked cars in their apartment complex parking lot, and that was where Monica trained. Her father, Karoli, was a professional cartoonist at the local newspaper. He had no formal coaching background, but he knew how to keep his kids engaged. He would draw Jerry from the cartoon Tom and Jerry on tennis balls and told 6-year-old Monica to imagine herself as Tom chasing Jerry across the court. It was his way of making training feel more like play. But even though he could keep her engaged, there was still a problem. The adult rackets were too heavy for Monica's small frame, so Karoli got creative with that too. He taught her to hit with 2 hands on both sides, forehand and backhand. In the professional game, a 2-handed forehand was virtually unheard of. Players would use 2 hands on the backhand for stability, but the forehand had always typically been a one-handed shot. That's simply how the game was played. But with 2 hands on both sides, Monica generated power that was totally unexpected at that age. And using this technique, by age 8, she was the #1 junior player in Yugoslavia. At 11 years old, she won the prestigious Junior Orange Bowl tournament in Miami, Florida. And watching from the stands that day was Nick Bollettieri, the legendary American coach who ran a tennis academy in Bradenton, Florida. Nick was absolutely blown away by Monica's ability and her unique technique, and he offered her a scholarship. But unfortunately, even with the scholarship, Monica's parents couldn't afford to just pick up their entire lives and move to a different country at the drop of a hat. So, for Monica to pursue her dreams, the family had to split up. In early 1986, Monica and her older brother Zoltan moved to the United States. At the time, Zoltan was 20 years old and Monica was only 12. Their parents stayed behind in Yugoslavia. Monica knew maybe 20 words in English, and she was surrounded by kids whose families could afford to pay while she was essentially there on charity. She ate alone in the cafeteria and cried herself to sleep most nights. She was only allowed to call home once a month. But every morning, she woke up and walked to the courts. She hit thousands of balls, ran the drills, and with a racket in her hand, no translation was needed. Tennis was a language she deeply understood. 9 months later, her parents finally arrived in Florida. Karoli quit his job as a cartoonist and he took over as Monica's coach full-time. The family was finally together again. The nightmare of being alone in a foreign country was over, and now the real work could begin. At 14, Monica played her first professional tournament and defeated the world #31 in straight sets. At 15, she turned professional, and at 16, she walked onto the clay at the French Open and did something that no one that young had ever done before. She beat the world #1, Steffi Graf, in the final. The same player Monica had watched on television back in Yugoslavia, studying her every move, the best female tennis player in the world. Monica dismantled her in straight sets. and from that moment on, it had seemed like Monica was unstoppable. In 1991, she became the youngest world number one in tennis history at that time. She swept the Australian, French and US Opens, crushing Martina Navratilova in the US final. Unfortunately, she had to sit out Wimbledon in that year due to an injury, but by the end of 1991, Monica Seles had already won 3 Grand Slams. In 1992, she won the Australian Open, then she defended her French Open title, beating Graf once again in another epic battle. The third set alone was a marathon of 18 games, ending 10-8. It was the third consecutive year Monica had won at Roland Garros, making her the first woman in the Open era to win 3 straight French Open titles. Karolyi watched on with a smile as his daughter demolished opponents with the two-handed technique that he'd helped her master. Around him, spectators marvelled at the power she was able to generate. The angles, the precision, no one had seen anything quite like it. Coaches around the world started taking note and began teaching the two-handed technique to junior players. The unconventional approach that Karolyi invented in a parking lot had started to prove itself as a legitimate weapon in modern tennis. Karolyi loved the attention and acknowledgement. He bowed from the stands, blowing kisses to the crowd. It was his way of reminding Monica to enjoy it, to smile, to stay silly, and to never let the pressure take away the joy. And that would turn out to be a very important lesson, because by that point, tennis commentators were starting to wonder if they were watching the greatest career in women's tennis history unfold in real time. It seemed like the only person who had any chance of threatening Monica's total dominance was Steffi Graf, the now former world number one, who wasn't quite ready to surrender her throne just yet. Steffi Graf had been the world number one since 1987. She'd already won 8 Grand Slam titles by the time Monica Seles burst onto the scene in 1990, but she'd been forced to watch as the teenager from Yugoslavia dismantled everything she had built. The way Monica played was different. She took the ball early, stepping inside the baseline and redirecting the pace with insane angles. And with every shot came her signature grunt. A loud, two-tone shriek that started when she was 7. It was a natural expression of the effort it took to swing a racket too heavy for her frame. But unfortunately, that sound made her a target. At Wimbledon in 1992, British tabloids started shaming Monica with front-page stories and mocking headlines. They even used electronic gruntometers to measure the decibel level of her grunts. And the players started to complain too. In the semi-final, Martina Navratilova told the chair umpire that she couldn't hear the ball off Monica's racket over the sound of her grunts. The pressure mounted, and when Monica walked into centre court to face Steffi Graf in the final, she caved. She went silent. She suppressed the grunt that had been part of her game since she was a child. Monica had surrendered a part of herself, and she paid for it. Graf completely demolished her in the final within 58 minutes. Monica would later say this moment was one of her biggest regrets. She had abandoned her natural game to appease critics, and it cost her Wimbledon, the one major title that she hadn't yet secured. But at the US Open 2 months later, she didn't make that same mistake, and she went on to dominate the tournament once again. The grunt was back, and so was her power. By early 1993, at age 19, Monica Seles had now won 8 Grand Slam titles. She reached the final in 33 of 34 tournaments and won 22 of them. In Grand Slams during that stretch, she lost only once. But while most of the world admired Monica's rise, not everyone was celebrating. Behind the scenes, jealousy and resentment was brewing, and would eventually manifest into something much darker. And it had all started when Steffi Graf lost her crown. In a quiet town in eastern Germany, a man named Günther Pascha was coming undone. He was 38, living in his aunt's attic in Gorbach. Stocky, balding, dishevelled, the kind of man no one really noticed. But step into his room and you'd know exactly who he was. The walls were plastered with photos of Steffi Graf. Posters, magazine covers, newspaper clippings. Her matches played on repeat. He owned dozens of VHS tapes and he watched them obsessively. He'd study the way she moved, the way she smiled, the way she held the trophy above her head. He wrote to her 4 or 5 times a year, anonymous letters filled with devotion. Once he even sent $185 in cash and asked her to buy a necklace to wear during tournaments. In his letters, he described Steffi Graf as a dream whose eyes radiate like diamonds, whose hair shines like silk. He said he would walk through fire for her. But then, Monica Seles showed up, and she stole the world #1 ranking from his angel. And something in Gunter Pascha broke. Pascha quit his job shortly after Steffi fell to #2. He wandered Western Germany for months, unemployed and aimless, before finally retreating back to his aunt's attic. Every Monica victory felt like a betrayal. To him, every trophy she held should have been Steffi's. Monica's success devastated him to the point where he sometimes lost the will to live. But this deranged parasocial pain curdled into a different kind of obsession about Monica. He began stalking Monica's schedule, tracking her matches, studying her habits, watching every tournament. And he started to convince himself that if Monica disappeared, his beloved Steffi would rise again. So, in April 1993, Pascha travelled to Hamburg for the Citizen Cup, and he brought with him a sharpened 9-inch boning knife. It was a cool spring evening at the Rotenbohm Tennis Club in Hamburg. 6,000 spectators had filled the stadium for the Citizen Cup quarter-final. Monica Seles was leading Magdalena Malieva 6-4, 4-3, just one break away from closing out the match. This was only her 3rd match back after nearly 2 months away. She'd been battling a severe viral illness since February. Steffi Graf was breathing down her neck, close to reclaiming the #1 ranking. And in 3 weeks, the French Open would begin, the tournament Monica owned. Roland Garros, the place where she'd defeated Graf twice in those legendary finals. Hamburg was supposed to be her comeback, her chance to rebuild match fitness, to protect her ranking, to prove that she was still the dominant force in women's tennis. However, as the changeover began, Monica sat courtside. She toweled off, leaned forward to sip from her cup. Her back was to the crowd, the same crowd that Gunter Pascha was sitting in, watching and waiting. The barrier behind Monica was barely waist high. Security was minimal, and that's when she felt it. The sudden, sharp pain right between her shoulder blades. Monica's head whipped around and she saw Pascha standing there gripping the 9-inch blade. And before Monica could react, he raised the knife again. A hero in the crowd acted quickly, putting Pascha in a chokehold and taking him down while the other crowd members restrained him. The limited security there leapt into action and they tore the weapon from Pascha's hand. Monica clutched her back as blood soaked her shirt. And in the stands, there was chaos. Gunter Pascha didn't even try to escape. In his mind, he had completed his task. Steffi Graf had never asked for help, but in his twisted fantasy, he had just saved her. Monica stood for a moment, dazed, and then collapsed on the court and was rushed to hospital. Within hours, Gunter Pascha confessed everything to the police. His motive was hauntingly simple. He wanted to hurt Monica Seles badly enough that she couldn't play tennis, so that Steffi Graf could reclaim the world #1 ranking. And to him, taking out Monica was the only way to make that happen. However, as Monica arrived at the hospital, it was discovered that the knife had narrowly missed her spine and vital organs by millimeters. Doctors stitched the wound, Steffi Graf visited Monica in the hospital to show her support, and Monica headed home in the weeks after. The physical pain inflicted was lasting. It would take months of rehab before she could even lift a racket again. But the psychological trauma is what would really tear Monica apart. And with the absolute farce that followed in the sentencing of her attacker, she'd soon discover that the worst was yet to come. 6 months after the attack, Pascha stood trial in Hamburg. Prosecutors sought a 2-year, 9-month sentence for attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. He had stalked Monica all week, he had purchased the knife, he had struck her from behind and attempted to strike again before others intervened. But when the judge handed down her verdict, Pasha received a 2-year suspended sentence. No prison time. He walked free. But why? Well, a court-appointed psychiatrist testified that Pasha has a highly abnormal personality. The judge accepted this assessment. She ruled that Pasha's mental state meant he lacked the full intent required for attempted murder. He had already spent 6 months in detention awaiting trial. That, the judge decided, was enough. From her home in Florida, Monica released a statement that captured her confusion and fury. She was understandably shocked and horrified. The man who admitted to stalking her, who admitted to stabbing her once and attempting to do it again, was going back to his normal life. Meanwhile, she was trapped in recovery from the vicious attack that could have killed her. What kind of message did this send to the world? Then, Martina Navratilova even spoke out. The same woman who had complained to the chair umpire about Monica's grunt just a year earlier. The same tennis legend who had helped turn Wimbledon's centre court against Monica. Now, she was furious on Monica's behalf. Speaking from a tournament in Germany, Navratilova told reporters that the country needed serious help with its laws, making the observation that when one human being can stab another with a clear intent to injure and potentially kill, and yet they simply walk away, something is fundamentally broken in the system. But she went even further. If someone had attacked Steffi Graf to help Monica Seles win, she said, they would have thrown away the key. The implication was clear. Navratilova felt like the weak sentencing was about nationality. Whatever disputes they'd had on the court, this transcended tennis entirely. Monica filed a huge civil lawsuit against the German Tennis Federation. It eventually grew to the point where she was seeking $15.7 million in damages. She argued that they had failed to provide adequate security in Hamburg and that their negligence had nearly cost her her life. But the judge would later dismiss the case in its entirety. And what's more, as another slap in the face, Monica was ordered to pay the court's legal costs. Weeks after the stabbing, while Monica was recovering in Florida, the World Tennis Association, the WTA, met in Rome, and they faced a brutal question. Should Monica Seles' world #1 ranking be frozen while she recovered from a near-fatal attack? Or should her absence simply be treated like an injury? 17 of the top players voted. 16 said no. Only Gabriela Sabatini abstained. And just like that, Monica was stripped of her ranking. It sent a message she couldn't ignore, that the sport she'd given everything to, the sport she'd helped transform, wasn't willing to protect her. Just 5 weeks after the attack, before Monica had even fully recovered physically, Steffi Graf reclaimed the world #1 spot. It appeared Gunter Parcher's plan had worked, just as he had intended. For the first few months after Hamburg, Monica tried to pretend it had never happened. She threw herself into rehabilitation and making plans to return at the US Open just 4 months later. To outsiders, she seemed to be coping. But then came Christmas 1993. For the first time since the attack, Monica had space to stop, space to think, and the memories came flooding back. The knife, the pain, the man's face, all the fears she had buried under hours of practice suddenly surfaced. She described it as darkness everywhere, a fog of despair that she couldn't escape. Monica developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. She had reoccurring nightmares about the attack and flashbacks to the moment the blade entered her back. The thought of returning to a tennis court surrounded by thousands of anonymous faces in the stands terrified her. She needed something to distract her. Late at night, alone in her room, Monica found that relief in food. Potato chips, pretzels, cookies, whatever she could find. The act of eating became a way to numb the emotional pain, to silence the memories and to feel something other than terror. For those few minutes while she binged, she felt okay-ish. But over the course of months, the emotional weight never fully lifted and the physical weight started to accumulate. The press picked up on it quickly, deliberately choosing the worst photos to use on the front page. And all the while, just a short time after the stabbing, Monica's father, Karoli, had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Monica's entire world was falling apart, and she watched helplessly as her dad underwent surgery and chemotherapy. The one person who had been by her side, helping her build everything she had, was slowly fading, and she was losing him at the exact moment that she needed him most. But Monica wasn't quite ready for this to be the end of her story. After how far she'd already come, she wasn't ready to give it all up just yet. She began working with a sports psychologist to address her post-traumatic stress disorder, and for the first time, she faced the horror that she'd spent all this time trying to outrun. She relived the moment the blade entered her back, revisited the terror of turning around and seeing the knife raised again. Bit by bit, she confronted the triggers that still haunted her. Crowds, sudden movements, loud noises. Even the sight of a tennis court filled with thousands of anonymous faces could send her spiraling, but she kept showing up, trying to reclaim a sense of safety. The physical rebuilding was just as difficult. In the months after the stabbing, Monica couldn't comb her hair without pain. The wound between her shoulder blades had healed, but the muscle trauma left her upper back in agony with basic movement. Physical therapists worked with her on simple mobility exercises, gentle stretching, and just walking to rebuild her sense of her body in space. And by mid-1994, she was able to pick up a racket again. Not to play, just to hold it, to once again feel its weight in her hand. She started by hitting against a wall with no opponent and no pressure. Then gentle drills with a coach, short practice rallies, longer rallies, practice sets, and through it all, her father, Karoli, never stopped showing up for her. Even while undergoing intensive cancer treatment, he coached Monica over the phone during matches and tournaments. It was quite the sight. A 63-year-old man hooked to IV lines, offering tactical guidance to a world-class tennis player from a hospital bed between sets. But even though he was by her side in spirit, every match Monica played came with a cruel cost. Every city she travelled to meant more time away from him, and every time she came home, he was thinner and weaker. Monica was racked with guilt, torn between the court and the hospital room, between chasing a comeback and missing her father's final months. But Karoli wouldn't have had it any other way. He had made tennis joyful for Monica when she was a child, and now, even as he was dying, he was helping her reclaim it. Monica Seles finally returned to professional tennis 27 months after the stabbing. She started off with a small exhibition match against none other than Martina Navratilova. And then, at the US Open, as she stepped onto the court for her first Grand Slam match since the attack, the crowd erupted. Thousands rose to their feet. Fans held up signs, chanted her name, some even wept. Security guards flanked the benches, metal detectors screened every fan. It was like the sport was saying to Monica, "We failed you once. We're sorry. We won't do it again." In the stands, Karoli watched on with pride. Monica tore through the draw like she'd never left, match after match. Vintage Seles. And by the end of the tournament, she was in the final, against none other than Steffi Graf. They hadn't faced each other since before Hamburg. And now, in front of 23,000 people, the two best players in the world were finally back on the same court. Monica came within points of winning the first set. She destroyed Graf in the second, winning 6 games to 0. But in the third set, Graf recovered. Experience won out. Monica's unbeaten comeback streak ended and Steffi Graf won the tournament. After the match, Steffi Graf approached the net and embraced Monica. Monica had lost, but she'd also proven that after everything she'd been through, she was still standing and she could still compete at the very highest level. 4 months after facing Graf at the US Open, Monica won the Australian Open, her 9th Grand Slam. She competed through her father's death in 1998, wearing his wedding ring on a chain around her neck as she reached the French Open final just weeks after his funeral. Then she won her first Olympic medal, bronze at the Sydney Games in 2000. But as the years went on, the injuries mounted. By 2003, a stress fracture forced her withdrawal at the Italian Open. 2 weeks later, she lost in the first round of the French Open, the first and only time Monica Seles ever lost a first-round match at a Grand Slam. After that day, she never played professionally again, and she never did secure the Wimbledon title. And on February 14, 2008, Monica Seles officially retired at the age of 34. Monica Seles never chased sympathy. She didn't want her story to be about what was taken from her. She wanted it to be about everything she reclaimed: her joy, her power, and her voice.